Ancient Egypt was a land tied to the Nile. The river was life. It brought water. It brought fertile soil. But it also brought something else. It brought crocodiles. These big reptiles were a constant presence. They were powerful. They were dangerous. People saw them often. They were just part of the landscape. Life along the Nile was not always easy. People fished. They farmed. They traveled by boat. Crocodiles were always there. They could attack people. They could attack livestock. So people knew to be careful. They respected the power of these animals. It was a respect born from fear, but it was also a respect born from awe. These creatures lived for a long time. They seemed to survive anything. They were strong. They were a force of nature. The Egyptians had to live with these animals. There was no escaping them. So they developed a complex view. Crocodiles were not just a threat, they were also a part of the world. A very old part. They were a symbol of the wild. They were a symbol of strength. And they were a symbol of the mysterious depths of the Nile itself. This constant interaction shaped how Egyptians thought. It shaped their beliefs. It even shaped their religion. They saw power in nature. They saw power in animals. The crocodile was no different. It was a creature of immense strength. It had a fierce bite. It could move fast in water. It could hide well. And it seemed to command its environment. For people who relied so much on the river, understanding its powerful creatures was important. It was a way to understand their own world. It was a way to understand their own place in it. The daily lives of Egyptians were very much connected to the Nile, and thus connected to the crocodile. Children grew up seeing them. Adults worked near them. They told stories about them. These stories might have been warnings. They might have been tales of respect, but they were always about the crocodile. It was a creature that demanded attention. It demanded a certain kind of reverence. Not necessarily worship at first, but a deep ingrained acknowledgement of its existence and its power. This relationship was very practical too. Crocodiles were part of the food chain. They ate fish. They ate other animals. They kept the river ecosystem in balance. The Egyptians saw this natural order. They understood that everything had a role, and the crocodile had a very big role. It was a top predator. It was a master of its watery home. So people thought about them a lot. They observed them. They tried to understand their habits. This understanding was vital for survival. It was vital for living safely along the riverbanks. And this understanding went beyond just fear. It became a kind of familiarity, like living with a dangerous neighbor. You know their ways. You respect their boundaries, and sometimes you even find a way to coexist. The Egyptians, over thousands of years, found many ways to coexist with these powerful animals. They didn't just avoid them, they incorporated them into their world. They saw meaning in them. Yes, they saw messages in them, and they began to treat some of them in very special ways. The crocodile was never just an animal to them, it was a lot more. The Nile shaped everything. It shaped their culture, it shaped their religion, and the creatures of the Nile, especially the crocodile, became symbols of that deep connection. Yes. They were a constant reminder of the river's bounty and its dangers. They were a part of the very fabric of Egyptian life. And this deep, long-standing relationship with the crocodile set the stage for how some of these powerful beasts would eventually be seen and treated. It laid the groundwork for their elevation from feared predator to something sacred, even cherished in certain circumstances. It was a unique bond shaped by the environment and the ancient people's deeply spiritual worldview. They lived with the crocodiles. They couldn't ignore them. And eventually, they chose to embrace some of what these creatures represented. The ancient Egyptians saw gods everywhere. They saw them in the sun. They saw them in the river. And they saw them in animals. This was a core part of their belief system. Animals were not just animals. They could be living representations of divine power, or they could be sacred symbols of a god. The crocodile was a very good example of this. It became strongly linked to a god named Sobek. Sobek was a powerful god. He was often shown with a crocodile head, or sometimes as a complete crocodile. He was a god of the Nile. He was a god of fertility. He brought water to the fields. He made things grow, but he was also a fierce protector. He had the strength of a crocodile. He could ward off evil. He could protect the innocent. So he was both a giver of life and a strong guardian. People prayed to Sobek for many things. They prayed for good harvests. They prayed for protection from the dangers of the Nile. They prayed for safety. Temples were built for Sobek. These were special places. People would go there to worship him. And in some of these temples, something amazing happened. Live crocodiles were kept. These were not just any crocodiles. These were sacred crocodiles. They were believed to be living forms of Sobek himself. They were treated with great respect. They were given special care, priests would look after them, they were fed the best foods. They might even wear jewelry like gold earrings or bracelets. These animals were revered. They were seen as a direct link to the god. One of the most famous places for Sobek worship was a city called Shadet. We know it as Crocodilopolis today. This city in the Fayum region was a major center for the cult of Sobek. It was here that many sacred crocodiles lived. They were kept in special pools within the temple grounds. People would come from far away to see them. They would bring offerings. These offerings could be food. They could be gifts. They were a way to show devotion to Sobek. They were a way to ask for his blessings. The idea was that by honoring the living crocodile, you were honoring Sobek. You were showing respect to the god. And you hoped to gain his favor. This was a very serious part of Egyptian religion. It wasn't just a simple superstition. It was a deeply held belief. The crocodile was a powerful symbol. It represented the raw power of the Nile. It represented the wild strength of nature. And Sobek was the god who harnessed that power. He brought order to it. He used it for good. So keeping these crocodiles was not like keeping a pet dog. It was a much more profound act. It was a religious act. It was a way to connect with the divine. These sacred crocodiles lived privileged lives. They were not hunted. They were not feared in the same way wild ones were. They were respected. They were cared for. They were a physical manifestation of the god on earth. This made the temples and the crocodiles within them very important places. They were hubs of religious activity. They drew many people, and the priests played a key role. They were the intermediaries. They understood the rituals. They knew how to care for the sacred animals. Their job was to maintain this connection between the people, the crocodile, and the god Sobek. It was a big responsibility. It showed how much the Egyptians valued their gods. It showed how much they believed in the sacredness of certain animals. The crocodile, a creature of both fear and awe, had found its special place in the heart of Egyptian religion. It was not just an animal. It was a living god. The worship of Sobek and the keeping of his living emblems highlights the unique way Egyptians interacted with their world. They didn't separate the natural from the supernatural. For them, they were deeply intertwined. The powerful, dangerous crocodile was not something to simply eliminate. It was something to understand, to respect, and eventually to incorporate into their spiritual lives in a very direct and tangible way. This blending of the wild with the divine is a fascinating aspect of ancient Egyptian culture. And it explains why some of the most fearsome creatures of the Nile were treated with such reverence. But it was more than just religion. It was more than just a living god. The relationship between Egyptians and crocodiles also had other layers. Sometimes, these animals were kept in ways that sound a bit like having a pet. Not a house cat, of course. But they were definitely cared for. They were part of a specific community, and they served other roles too. They were protectors, they were symbols of power. Imagine a large temple complex. It has high walls, it has sacred areas. People want to keep these places safe. A big, powerful crocodile in a temple pool could be a very good deterrent. It's a natural guard who would dare try to sneak in, knowing there's a huge crocodile waiting. The very presence of such an animal would send a clear message. It would say, this place is protected, this place is sacred, stay away. So, these crocodiles were not just divine symbols. They were also very practical security measures. And people were fascinated by them. Taming a wild animal, especially one as dangerous as a crocodile, shows power. It shows control. It shows that you can bring order to the wild. For pharaohs or powerful priests, having a large, calm crocodile under their care would be a huge status symbol. It would show their authority. It would show their special connection to the gods. It would say, even the most fearsome creatures obey me. Even they are part of my domain. This kind of display was important in ancient Egypt. It reinforced the social order. It showed who was in charge. The crocodile itself also symbolized many things. It was strong. It was resilient. It could live a long time. It could survive harsh conditions. These were qualities that Egyptians admired. They wanted to have these qualities themselves. So, the crocodile became a symbol of strength, power, and even longevity. Pharaohs sometimes used crocodile imagery. They wanted to be seen as strong and powerful, just like the crocodile. They wanted to rule for a long time. The animal represented enduring power, and there was a sense of wonder too. How do you feed a crocodile? How do you keep it calm? The priests who looked after these animals were skilled. They understood crocodile behavior. They knew how to handle them. This wasn't something just anyone could do. It took knowledge, it took patience, it took a deep understanding of the animal. So, the care itself was a special skill. It was part of the priestly duties, it was a serious job. These animals were not truly pets in the modern sense of a companion animal, but they were domesticated in a way. They lived within human structures. They relied on humans for food. They interacted with humans, even if it was a one sided interaction of feeding and viewing. They were given names sometimes. We know of a famous sacred crocodile named Petsuchos. This means son of Suchos, Suchos being another name for Sobek. This naming shows a personal connection. It shows a level of familiarity. It goes beyond just seeing them as a dangerous wild beast. The care of these sacred crocodiles was quite elaborate. They were fed meat, fish, and even milk and honey sometimes. These were luxury foods. This showed how highly they were valued. They had special enclosures. They were part of daily temple life. They were a constant presence, and they were a living, breathing link to the spiritual world. So, they were not just feared creatures. They were respected. They were protected. They were even, in their own way, cherished. They embodied the complex relationship Egyptians had with their powerful natural world, where awe and utility could blend with the divine. They served many roles. They were god, guard, and symbol, all rolled into one ancient, scaly package. This combination made them incredibly significant. So, why keep something so dangerous? This is a question people often ask. It seems strange to bring a wild, powerful predator into your community. But the Egyptians had good reasons. They were not just about religion, though that was a big part. There were practical reasons too, there were social reasons, and there was a deep fascination. First, let's think about acquiring them. Nobody would just grab a full-grown wild crocodile. That would be madness. Instead, priests or caretakers likely took young crocodiles. Baby crocodiles are much smaller. They are easier to handle. They can be raised in captivity. This early upbringing would make them more accustomed to humans. They might not be tamed like a dog, but they would be less aggressive, they would be more predictable, they would learn that humans bring food. This process, even for a crocodile, creates a different kind of animal than one raised purely in the wild. The control over such a powerful creature was a big draw. It showed mastery. It showed a connection to forces beyond ordinary human experience. For a ruler or a high priest, demonstrating this control was a way to show their divine favor. It reinforced their authority. It made them seem more powerful, more connected to the gods. Imagine the impact on people seeing a priest calmly feed a large crocodile. It would inspire awe. It would inspire respect. It would make people believe in the power of the priests and the gods they served. And let's not forget the wow factor. Like, people are drawn to powerful exotic animals. Even in ancient times, having a crocodile, especially a large one, would be a spectacle. It would draw crowds to the temple, it would make the temple famous, this attention would benefit the cult of Sobek. It would bring more offerings, it would increase the influence of the priests. So there was a kind of social and economic benefit to having these magnificent animals. They were living attractions, the resources needed to keep a crocodile were significant. They ate a lot of food, they needed a secure enclosure. This meant that only wealthy institutions like temples or powerful individuals could afford to keep them. It was a costly endeavor. This exclusivity further reinforced their status as symbols of power and wealth. If you could afford to keep a crocodile, you were clearly important, you had access to resources, you had influence. There was also the idea of an animal as an intermediary. Egyptians believed animals could communicate with the gods, or they could carry messages. A sacred crocodile, being a living embodiment of Sobek, was a direct line. People might believe their prayers or offerings to the crocodile would be heard directly by Sobek. This made the physical crocodile very important. It wasn't just a symbol, it was a conduit. It was a way to interact with the divine in a very tangible sense. Think about the psychological impact. Living so close to the dangerous Nile, with its unseen threats, could be very unsettling. But by bringing the crocodile into the temple, by making it sacred, by showing control over it, Egyptians were perhaps trying to mitigate some of that fear. They were transforming a threat into a protector. They were turning a symbol of chaos into a symbol of divine order. This transformation could bring a sense of comfort and security to the people. It was a way to make peace with their environment. So while keeping a crocodile might seem crazy to us, for the ancient Egyptians, it made a lot of sense. It blended their religion, their social structure, their desire for power, and their deep understanding of their natural world. It was a complex decision driven by many factors. It wasn't just a whim, it was a deeply ingrained cultural practice that spoke volumes about their beliefs and their way of life. The dangerous creature was not simply tolerated, it was elevated, it was revered. It was brought into the fold. How do we know all this today? We weren't there. We can't ask the ancient Egyptians directly. But they left us a lot of clues. These clues are found in the ground. They are found on walls. They are found in texts. Archaeology is how we piece together their story, and the evidence for crocodile keeping is strong. One of the biggest pieces of evidence comes from mummies. Thousands of mummified crocodiles have been found. Some are huge adults, many are small babies. They were carefully wrapped, they were buried in special cemeteries. This wasn't just a random act. It was a deliberate religious practice. The sheer number of them tells us how widespread this practice was. It shows how important the crocodile was. These mummies have been found in places like Kam Ambo, a famous temple dedicated to Sobek, and another god, Horoeris. They were also found in the Fayum region, the heart of Sobek worship. These mummified crocodiles were often offerings. People would offer a mummified crocodile to Sobek, much like they might offer a small statue or other valuable items. It was a way to show devotion. It was a way to seek a blessing. The fact that they took the time and effort to mummify these animals, a complex and expensive process, shows their immense significance. It wasn't just a quick sacrifice. It was a lasting tribute. We also have many depictions. Crocodiles appear in Egyptian art. They are on temple walls. They are in hieroglyphs. They are on papyrus scrolls. Some show Sobek as a man with a crocodile head. Others show full crocodiles being honored. They are sometimes shown wearing jewelry. These images back up the idea that certain crocodiles were treated very specially. They were not just wild animals, they were revered figures. Written texts also tell us things. Ancient Greek and Roman writers who visited Egypt later wrote about the crocodile cults. They described the sacred crocodiles. They wrote about the priests who cared for them. They mention the feeding rituals. These historical accounts provide a window into what these practices looked like to outsiders. They confirm what the Egyptians themselves depicted in their art. The sites themselves give us clues. The architecture of temples like Kamambo includes specific areas that might have been used to house crocodiles, pools, or enclosures that seem designed for these large animals. This physical layout supports the idea that these temples were not just places of worship, but also homes for living sacred creatures. The very design of their religious spaces was influenced by the presence of these animals. The scale of this practice was huge. It wasn't just one or two temples, it was a widespread phenomenon, especially in certain regions. The collection of thousands of mummified crocodiles at various sites speaks volumes. It shows a consistent belief system over many centuries. It tells us that this wasn't a fleeting trend. It was a fundamental part of ancient Egyptian religion and culture. So, the legacy of this unique relationship is clear. It's preserved in the dry sands of Egypt. It's in the art, the texts, and the very remains of the animals themselves. It tells a story of a people who lived incredibly close to nature, a people who found divinity in the powerful animals around them, and a people who developed a profound, complex bond with one of the most feared creatures of their world. The ancient Egyptians didn't just keep crocodiles as pets in the way we think of pets today, but they did care for them, they did honor them, they did treat them with a kind of reverence that goes far beyond simple companionship. These crocodiles were living gods, they were powerful symbols, they were guardians, and their place in ancient Egyptian society was unique. It shows us how deeply interwoven their lives were with their environment. It shows us how their beliefs shaped every part of their world, and it remains a fascinating testament to a culture that saw the sacred in the very creatures that shared their river. It was a truly remarkable relationship, unlike almost any other in history.